Here's a question we get all the time. Is it actually safe to plug a solar panel into my wall?
And it's a fair question. You're taking a device that generates electricity, from the sun no less, and plugging it into the same outlet you use for your toaster? That's not something anyone has done before, at least not legally in the US.
So what's the honest answer?
The honest answer is yes, it's safe, if you're using a certified system installed correctly. But there are 3 real safety concerns that are worth understanding, not because they should scare you away, but because understanding them is what makes you a smart buyer and a safe installer.
And those 3 concerns have names.
Breaker masking, anti-islanding, and UL 3700. Today, we're going to explain all 3 in plain English, and by the end of this episode, you'll know more about plug-in solar safety than most electricians do.
Welcome to Plug-in Solar Explained, the simple way to understand plug-in solar, home energy, and the policies shaping America's next consumer energy movement. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Mike. Today, we're doing a deep dive on safety. Not because plug-in solar is dangerous, it isn't when done right, but because the safety story is actually fascinating. It involves circuit physics, utility worker protection, a new safety standard that didn't exist until December 2025, and a proprietary plug that looks nothing like what you'd expect.
Let's start with the most important one, the one that actually caused fires in Europe before anyone figured out what was happening.
Breaker masking. It sounds technical, but the concept is surprisingly simple once you understand how a circuit breaker works. Walk us through it. A circuit breaker is a safety device. Its entire job is to monitor how much current is flowing through the wires in your wall, and cut the power, if that current gets too high. Because if too much current flows through a wire, the wire heats up. And if it heats up enough, it can melt the insulation and start a fire.
So the breaker is the last line of defense between an overloaded wire and your house burning down?
Exactly. Now, a circuit breaker works by sitting at the beginning of the circuit, at the panel, and measuring everything that flows through it. Under normal conditions, all the current going to your appliances passes through that breaker. It sees everything.
But plug-in solar changes that.
It does. When you plug a solar system into a shared circuit, one that also has other things plugged into it, the solar system feeds current into that circuit from the outlet end, not from the panel end, which means some of that current never passes through the breaker.
So the breaker is blind to it.
Partially blind. Here's the math. Say you have a 20 amp circuit. You've got a hairdryer pulling 14 amps and a space heater pulling 14 amps. That's 28 amps total flowing through the wire, way over the 20 amp limit. Normally, the breaker trips immediately.
But if there's a solar system on that circuit?
The solar system is feeding, say, 10 amps into the circuit from the outlet side. The breaker only sees the net current, the total load minus the solar contribution. So instead of seeing 28 amps, it sees 18 amps, safely below the 20 amp trip threshold. The breaker does nothing.
But the wire is still carrying 28 amps.
The wire is still carrying 28 amps. And a 28 amp load on a 20 amp wire is a 40% overload. At that level, the wire heats up rapidly, insulation softens, and you have a fire risk.
This actually happened in Europe.
It did. Germany and other European countries legalized balcony solar before anyone had fully worked out the safety standards. There were incidents. Not widespread, but enough to get researchers at the Fraunhofer Institute studying the problem seriously.
So how did the US solve it?
With a 2-tier approach, and this is actually elegant. The key insight from the research, both from Fraunhofer in Germany and from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory here in the US, is that the risk isn't the same for all system sizes.
Small systems are safer.
Much safer. At 391 watts or below on a standard 120-volt US circuit, the maximum solar current is only about 3.26 amps. Even in the worst-case scenario where the circuit is already running at its maximum continuous load, the total wire current would still be within the wire's safety margin. The physics just don't allow a dangerous overload at that wattage.
So below 391 watts, you can plug into any outlet.
That's what several states have codified. Colorado, Maryland, and Maine all have explicit provisions saying that systems at or below 391 watts are exempt from the dedicated circuit requirement. You can plug them into a shared circuit, no electrician needed.
And above 391 watts?
Above 391 watts, up to the 1200 watt cap that most state laws set, you need what's called breaker masking protection. The most common solution is a dedicated circuit. That's a circuit that serves only the solar system and nothing else. When nothing else is sharing the wire, there's nothing to mask. The breaker sees everything.
And installing a dedicated circuit means calling an electrician.
For most people, yes. It typically costs $150 to $400, depending on your panel and where the outlet needs to go. But here's what's important. A dedicated circuit is not the only solution. UL 3700, which we'll get to in a minute, actually certifies multiple engineering approaches to solve breaker masking. Power control systems, oversized conductors, there are other pathways. The market is innovating.
Let's talk about this second safety concern, anti-islanding. This one has a more dramatic backstory.
It does. Islanding is what happens when a solar system keeps generating power even after the grid has gone down. The term comes from the idea of creating an electrical island, a section of wiring that's still live while everything around it is dead.
And the danger is for utility workers.
Exactly. When a utility cuts power to a neighborhood for maintenance, storm damage, a downed line, the line workers assume those wires are dead. They follow lockout and tag-out procedures. If a solar system is still feeding power into those lines, a worker can be electrocuted by energy they have no reason to expect.
That's not a theoretical risk.
It's not. It's why anti-islanding protection has been required in rooftop solar for decades. Even a small 800-watt plug-in system produces about 6.7 amps at 120 volts. That's well above the 0.1 amps that can cause cardiac arrest.
So how does the system know when the grid has gone down?
Every certified plug-in solar inverter uses a layered detection system. The first layer is passive. The inverter constantly monitors the voltage and frequency of the grid. The US grid runs at exactly 60 Hz and 120 volts. If either drifts outside a very narrow window, the inverter trips.
But what if the solar output and local loads are perfectly balanced? Voltage and frequency might stay stable even without the grid.
That's the edge case passive detection alone can't catch. So there's a second layer, active detection. The inverter deliberately introduces a tiny frequency bias into its output. When the grid is present, the grid's enormous inertia absorbs that bias. When the grid is gone, frequency drifts rapidly until it crosses the trip threshold.
How fast does all this happen?
Less than 0.2 seconds. That's the maximum allowed under the standard. In practice, most modern inverters trip in under 0.1 seconds. And here's an interesting detail. Unplugging the system is actually faster than a grid outage. When you pull the plug from the wall, the voltage drops to zero instantly. The inverter detects that on the very first half cycle, within 8 milliseconds. The plug prongs are electrically dead before you've even finished the motion of pulling them out.
So the plug is safe to touch immediately after unplugging.
Immediately. The inverter is a grid-following device. It cannot generate AC power without an external voltage reference to synchronize with. Pull the plug, lose the reference, the system shuts down. It's safe by design.
If the system shuts off when the grid goes down, what about backup power?
A standard grid-tied plug-in solar system does not provide backup power during a blackout. When the grid goes down, the system shuts off. Full stop.
Even if the sun is shining?
Even if the sun is shining. The anti-islanding protection doesn't know whether the grid went down because of a storm or because a utility worker is on a ladder nearby. It treats every grid outage the same way. Shut down immediately.
So how do you get backup power from plug-in solar?
You need a battery system with a backup mode. Some plug-in solar systems, particularly higher-end ones with integrated batteries, can island intentionally. They disconnect from the grid and run your critical loads from solar and battery. But this is a specific product feature, not standard.
So if backup power is important to you, that's a key question to ask when you're shopping.
It's the key question. Does this system have a backup mode? What loads can it support? How long will the battery last? A 3 kilowatt-hour battery running a refrigerator, some lights, and a router can get you through a 12 to 15-hour outage. That's meaningful resilience, but you have to buy the right system.
Now let's talk about UL 3700, the piece that ties everything together.
UL 3700 is the safety standard from UL Solutions, specifically for plug-in solar systems, published December 2025.
It's the reason plug-in solar is now legal in a growing number of states.
Why did we need a new standard?
We had standards for rooftop solar, UL 1741 for inverters, IEEE 1547 for grid interconnection, but neither was designed for a consumer product that plugs into a wall outlet. There was a gap, and that gap is what made plug-in solar legally ambiguous for years.
What does UL 3700 cover?
3 things: overcurrent protection, the breaker masking problem; touch safety, making sure plug prongs can't be energized when you unplug; and GFCI interaction, making sure the solar system doesn't damage the ground fault protection already in your home.
Overcurrent protection. That's the breaker masking solution.
Right. UL 3700 certifies that the system has an approved solution: dedicated circuit, power control system, or oversized conductors. It certifies that whatever approach the manufacturer chose actually works.
Touch safety. What's the risk?
Standard plugs were designed for devices that consume power. Plug-in solar reverses that. The plug is connected to a power-generating device. If the inverter were slow to shut down, you could pull the plug and touch live prongs.
But the inverter shuts down in milliseconds.
It does, but UL Solutions took the position that relying solely on anti-ice landing for shock protection isn't sufficient. Touch safety needs its own dedicated layer. That's why UL 3700 requires a proprietary plug, a uniquely configured connector that can only mate with a compatible, purpose-built receptacle.
Which means you can't just plug a UL 3700 system into any outlet.
You can't. You need the matching receptacle installed. That's typically done by an electrician as part of the dedicated circuit installation. But the benefit is that the proprietary connector design ensures the plug prongs are never accessible to the user in an energized state. The safety is built into the hardware, not just the software.
GFCI interaction? That one sounds obscure, but I have a feeling it matters.
It's the one that surprises people most. GFCIs are the outlets with test and reset buttons, required in bathrooms, kitchens, garages, outdoor outlets. They detect ground fault currents as low as 5 milliamps and cut power in under 25 milliseconds.
So what's the problem with plug-in solar and GFCIs?
2 problems. First, existing GFCIs were designed for one-directional current flow. When you backfeed power from a solar system, you're sending current in the opposite direction. UL Solutions tested this. They found backfeeding can damage the GFCI circuitry, causing it to fail silently. The outlet looks normal, the reset button still works, but the ground fault protection is gone.
The safety device fails without any warning? So the GFCI trips, but the hazard continues.
For up to 2 seconds, which is long enough to matter. This is why UL 3700 requires a bidirectional GFCI, one that's specifically designed and tested to handle current flowing in both directions. These are different from standard GFCIs. They're a newer product category, and the UL 943 standard, which covers GFCIs, is being updated to accommodate them.
This is also why you can't just plug a solar system into any outdoor outlet.
Exactly. That outdoor outlet has a standard GFCI. A UL 3700 compliant system uses a proprietary plug that physically cannot mate with a standard GFCI outlet. The connector mismatch is intentional. It's a physical barrier that prevents the unsafe connection.
What does all this mean for someone who wants to buy a plug-in solar system today?
If you buy a UL 3700 certified system, all 3 safety concerns are addressed. The certification validates that the manufacturer has solved breaker masking, touch safety, and GFCI interaction. You don't have to engineer the safety yourself. Just buy the right product and install it correctly.
And install it correctly means what?
For systems above 391 watts, which is most of the interesting systems on the market, it means having a dedicated circuit installed with the compatible proprietary receptacle. That's a job for a licensed electrician. Budget $150 to $400.
What about systems under 391 watts?
Under 391 watts, the physics are on your side. Colorado, Maryland, and Maine all allow self-installation on a shared circuit. You still want a GFCI outlet, good practice regardless, but no dedicated circuit, no electrician required.
What if you're in a state that hasn't passed a plug-in solar law yet?
This is where it gets complicated. In states without explicit legislation, the legal status is ambiguous. Your utility's interconnection rules, written for large rooftop systems, technically apply. Most utilities have not updated those rules to accommodate plug-in solar, so you may technically be in violation of your utility agreement even with a fully certified, perfectly safe system.
Which is exactly the problem that state legislation is designed to solve.
Exactly. The safety is solved. UL 3700 is the proof. The remaining barrier is legal clarity, getting states to update their rules to reflect the reality that a 400-watt plug-in system is not the same thing as a 10-kilowatt rooftop array. That's the legislative work happening right now.
There's a bigger point here about what safety standards do for a category like this.
Safety standards aren't just about preventing harm. They're about enabling commerce. Before UL 3700, there was no certified pathway for a manufacturer to bring a plug-in solar product to the US market with a clear safety story. No standard meant no certification. No certification meant no retail. No retail meant no mainstream adoption.
So UL 3700 is the key that unlocks the retail channel.
It's the key that unlocks everything. Once you have UL 3700 certification, you can sell at Home Depot, Amazon, Costco. Retailers won't carry electrical products without recognized safety certification. That's just how the US market works.
We're at the very beginning of what this market could become.
The comparison I keep coming back to is smoke detectors. In 1970, smoke detectors existed but weren't widely adopted. Then UL listed them, states started requiring them, and within a decade, they were in every home in America. Plug-in solar is at a similar inflection point. The safety story is solved. The standard exists. The legislation is moving. What happens next depends on how fast the market catches up.
All right, let's do the bottom line. 3 takeaways from today.
Takeaway 1. Breaker masking is a real fire risk, but it's a solved problem. Systems under 391 watts are safe on shared circuits by physics. Systems above 391 watts need a dedicated circuit or an equivalent certified solution. A licensed electrician can install one for $150 to $400.
Takeaway 2. Anti-Icelanding protection means your system shuts off during a blackout, automatically in under 0.2 seconds. This protects utility workers. It's not a flaw. If you want backup power, you need a system with a specific backup mode and an integrated battery.
Takeaway 3. UL 3700 is the safety standard that makes plug-in solar legal and retail-ready in the US. It was published in December 2025. It requires a proprietary plug, not a standard NEMA outlet, and a bidirectional GFCI. If you're buying a system, look for UL 3700 certification. That's the signal that the safety engineering has been done correctly.
And the big picture takeaway? Plug-in solar is safe when you do it right. The safety concerns are real, they're understood, and they're solved. What's left is making sure buyers know what doing it right looks like, which is exactly what this show is for.
That's it for today. If you want to go deeper on any of these topics, Plug-in Solar US has full articles on breaker masking, anti-islanding, and UL 3700, all linked in the show notes. They're detailed, they're technical, and they're worth reading if you're serious about understanding this category.
Next time, we're talking about time of use rates, the electricity pricing structure that can literally double your savings from plug-in solar if you know how to use it. That's an episode you don't want to miss.
Until then, Plug-in Solar Explained is the simple way to understand plug-in solar, home energy, and the policies shaping America's next consumer energy movement.
Learn more at pluginsolarus.com.